All right, folks, I apologize we're a little bit late, but glad to have everybody here with us. Let's go ahead and call to order the MFP Foundation Program Task Force. First order of business is roll call.
Yes, sir. Mr. Bourne?
Here.
Mr. Ruckus?
Here.
Dr. Corvo?
Here.
Mr. Garvey?
Here.
Representative Landry has a proxy, Mr. Mathis.
Here.
Dr. Leche?
Here.
Ms. McReynolds has a proxy, Mr. Fleming.
Here.
Ms. Moe?
Here.
Ms. Monica?
Here.
Senator Morsch?
Here.
Ms. Neeland?
Here.
Ms. Polito?
Here.
Ms. Posey?
Here.
Dr. Procopio?
Here.
Mr. Richard?
Here.
Ms. Romer?
Here.
And Ms. Chung?
Here.
Ms. Smith?
Here.
Mr. Sanji?
Here.
Dr. Thomas?
Here.
Ms. Boucher?
Here.
Superintendent White?
Here.
Dr. Baker? Mr. Gougeot?
Robert Collins for Charles Bujal.
All right. Dr. Michelle?
Here.
Ms. Whitney?
Here.
All right, you have quorum.
Thank you very much. What's our next item of business? The next item, I believe, is approval of minutes. You have the minutes there in front of you. Do I have a motion to approve? So moved. Thank you. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second. All right, Mr. Richard and Ms. Moe. Any objection? I'm sorry.
I had a question about
Go ahead.
this. I could be misremembering, I do it often, but I thought there had been either a motion or the topic of increasing the MFP by the 2.75% had been raised. And the minutes does not reflect that.
There was not a motion to that effect. It might have been a discussion, so it would not have been noted specifically if that's the case. So without a motion, it wouldn't be noted specifically, to my knowledge.
I thought it had been a motion, but I seconded it, but I could be misremembering.
Okay. Any other questions? Any other questions, any objections to the motion? Hearing none, motion carries. Minutes have been approved. Thank you. Our next item is consideration of discussion regarding recommendations for the 2018-2019 MFP formula. To get us started, I'm going to turn to the superintendent to kind of catch us up if there's been any changes or any updates from our last meeting, and then we'll go from that point.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To the members of the task force, I'll share just the updates in the time since the December meeting of the task force. First, in January, the governor introduced his executive budget. That budget, as you know, includes an appropriation for the minimum foundation program. That appropriation is roughly $2 million larger than the formula will appropriate this year. That is to account for a projection of very modest growth in population, and when I say very modest, I mean almost negligible growth, which is the projection that we are making. Therefore, what is currently in the budget that will be taken up by Senator Morrish and by Representative Landry and the rest of the legislature is effectively a flat MFP. It does not include a change in the base per pupil. It does not include a change in the rate of the weights. Now, BESI, at the same time, is the body that ultimately designs and approves the formula. The formula is not, as you know, in the executive budget. BESI will take up the formula, and they will, as part of that process, consider your recommendation at its March 12 and 13 meetings, and then it has to be submitted to the legislature by the 15th. The legislature will, presuming there is a resolution adopted, will then consider that resolution, but as you know, may not amend it, which really leaves the legislature, if they're not happy with what has been sent to them, two options. First, they can simply vote it down and it will revert to the same formula that exists today, or they can send it back and suggest that it be amended, and BESI can take up the formula. There's one other action they can use, as we've discussed in this committee many times. They can simply appropriate monies at the end of the session, but without time for Bessie to go back and reconsider the formula. And we've discussed many times here why that's not, I believe I can say, an optimal solution from anyone's perspective, but it is what has had to happen in recent years. I can only say this as an observer, and of course I would defer to those members of the legislature present, but it feels like this is relatively similar to past sessions where, past meetings of this task force where you've had a budget introduced that has been flat. There is not a lot of certainty because it's balancing revenues with expenditures, and it probably means there won't be much reconciliation on that until toward the end of the session is what I would have to imagine. That's been the process going forward. I don't know precisely what that means for this task force, but it does mean that we're in a similar position to past years, and we know that there is not, at least at the start of the process, in anticipation of a larger MFP for next year. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. So that's the tone that we're all familiar with, I believe, at this point. Unless there's anybody who wants to add anything in particular to that, then what I've done is prepare a motion that I'd like to offer up to the floor. Michelle, did you
I just want to ask a question.
Certainly.
Okay. So last year, and we put the mic on. Last year, didn't we have money funded outside of the MFP? And weren't there additional dollars that were funded? And I'm just curious where that stands. I know we had dollar amounts that were outside of the MFP, and is that still in the picture? I know flat rate. So does flat rate mean flat rate only MFP? Or flat rate, the amount that was funded outside of the MFP for those other items is still going to be in the budget too?
Those monies are protected because they're inside the formula.
They're not outside.
So that was, it was in level 4,
Okay.
which are the supplemental course allocation
Right.
and high cost allocation.
So that's
rates. Yes. It was 2 years ago
Okay.
when there was money outside the formula, and it was 3 years ago when there was more money than that outside the formula.
Okay.
Don't worry, if there isn't a formula passed this year, or if it's just a steady state formula, you don't lose money relative to last year.
Thank you. Anything else before? So what I want to read to you now, and then I'll see if there's anyone on the floor takes this. This gives us a basis for discussion upon a motion in a second. A motion that the task force recommends that Bessie approve continuation of the current MFP formula for fiscal year 18-19, accounting for normal student growth, and the task force further recommends that Bessie requests that in the event additional funds are realized, the legislature will return the MFP formula to Bessie so that additional funds can be included in that formula. Now, that is something that no one has to pick up, but I wanted to give some of them as a basis for discussion. If someone would offer that motion, we get a second, we can discuss further. But that seems to be, from where I sit, probably the best way to move forward, knowing the realities that we're working in right now. I'm happy to reread that if you need me to do so. Dr. Corville?
Do we need a motion before we can discuss?
I'd like to, if you want to take that motion, we need a second, then we can discuss from there.
I'll make a motion.
Okay, do I have a second for that motion? Mr. Garvey. So I have a motion and a second. So I'll reread this for you right now for discussion purposes. Dr. Corville has moved that the task force recommends that Bessie approve a continuation of the current MFP formula for fiscal year 18-19, accounting for normal student growth, and that the task force further recommends that Bessie request that in the event additional funds are realized, the legislature will return the MFP formula to Bessie so that the additional funds can be included in the formula. Mr. Richard.
Would the chair, as well as this committee, entertain some additional language in regards to there should be the task force recommends that there should be no effort to reduce the MFP in any fashion.
You know, I couldn't speak for the task force, but my understanding is it wouldn't be, as the superintendent just explained, this would be a hold steady from last year, worst case scenario. So that would not necessarily be relevant to the motion at this point. It's already taken care of. Those dollars that were approved last year, worst case scenario, would revert back to that point.
So I guess your comments are clarifying that there would be no efforts by Bessie to reduce the MFP in any form or fashion.
There'd be no efforts to reduce the MFP.
Bessie in any recommended resolution.
I'm not in a position to speak for Bessie as a board at this point. Senator, did I see you raise your hand?
Yeah, please. The only other thing that I would suggest is to add some language that our budget is always a last-minute issue. And I wouldn't want to leave out the opportunity to include money outside of the formula. And I think that Bessie should address that also in some of this language, that even though we would like to have it in the formula, if we have time and can send it back to Bessie, we would also gladly accept money that is available outside of the formula.
I think that's certainly a good point. The wording would not preclude that, but I certainly would welcome if there wanted to be some wording to further clarify that point. Dr. Corville?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you guys. And I sorry.
Hey, everybody. Got to turn my teacher voice off when the microphone's in front of me. Sorry. I agree with you guys. I read Cameron Davis's statement, heard it as, implying that there wouldn't be any reduction, and if there's other money available, let's put it in there in any which way we can and serve students and teachers. And if there's a way we can figure out to make that more clear, I think that's a good idea. I'm really glad to see the committee as a whole on the same page and support for everybody. Thank y'all.
Thank you. Ms. Loche?
I just have a question. So what Mr. Richard is requesting or asking is that Bessie would include that in some kind of a statement going along with the formula, that if there are funds available outside Senator Morris, if there are any funds recognized outside of the formula in the budget negotiations, we'd be happy to accept them in some type of a language that would go with the message that we send over.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Senator.
So in other words, it sounds like right now this would not exclude that by any means, but it may behoove us to add wording that would encourage that as well specifically. So if we want to have some wording added to that, I'd certainly entertain that. Mr. Fleming.
Yeah, thank you. So it's my understanding that Bessie, if the MFP fails, we resort back to the current MFP. So if it's clear that we all believe, that everyone believes we need more funds to educate students, considering teachers in Louisiana are paid $1,700 on average, less than the Southern Regional average, I think I read. Yeah, today. So, I just feel it's the responsibility to push forward an MFP that communicates to the legislature the needs of schools to educate students, and when necessary to do that. And I am confused by the motion because it's asking Bessie to approve a continuation MFP, but then directing the legislature to return it if they have more money. And as I appreciate how it works, the legislature can just approve for thumbs up or thumbs down to MFP. And if you have a new MFP on the table for the legislature to consider, if there's not funding, they can just vote no, which is a hard vote, I'm sure, across the street, but it would be a recognition that the funds are not available to support an increase that everyone agrees with, and that it would go a lot quicker. And if there are not the funds available, there is not the will of the legislature to create the funds, we already have a continuation budget, it stays the same. It would save a lot of time and meetings if you just had a vote what you think it should be. It's my suggestion.
Noted. Ms. Mo.
I'd like to lend my support to what Mr. Fleming has just said. We have no increase request for the MFP. I think we should make an increase request. It would play out as Mr. Fleming has already said. It is not the 2.75, which I think it should be.
then we need to decide on what an increase would be. I know that that is a difficult decision for the legislature, but at the same time, I really do believe that me personally, and I hope everyone on this committee feels the same way, I don't represent the legislature. I represent children in schools. I represent teachers who are in those classrooms. And I represent the communities that need that money to educate their children. So I would be in favor of having some kind of an increase, whether it be 1% or the 1.385 that we had a few years back. In fact, I would make that in the form of a motion.
So to be clear, then you are making a motion right now.
Substitute motion, yes.
Substitute or amendment to this motion to rather than a continuation to put forward
yes,
an increase.
Yeah, it would be in addition to the motion that you put forward.
So let me make sure I'm getting this, capturing this correctly. Then it would be to take out the continuation of the current MFP, and rather you would like to add in there an increase of 1% in MFP.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, well, we need a second for that. Ms. Shum seconds that. Okay. And then we need a discussion on that before we vote on that as a piece, as a motion, as an amendment to that motion. Mr. Colbert, you had your hand up?
Yeah, just clarification. Was that motion to add on to your original or to completely replace it?
It would be, if, to be clear then, if this motion, which has been moved and seconded, we're discussing now, if we were to vote up for that, it would change the original motion to read, the task force recommends that Bessie approve MFP formula increase of 1% for 18-19. Accounting for almost doing growth and task for the rest of the word would be the same. So it would be that if you voted down the motion, this amendment, it would revert to the normal wording, which is what you put forth, which would be a continuation of the current MFP. Is that clear? I see a mixture of nods and shakes. It looks like mostly nods on that. Mr. Richard, you have a question relative to this?
Just a point of order. This is a substitute motion that we're voting on.
It was an amendment, actually. The amendment would be to change the wording from continuation to an increase of 1%. Correct.
And you're not, as the chair, you're not ruling that out you're allowing that amendment to be voted upon to the original motion.
That's correct. So the vote we would have in front of us next, once we finish discussion, would be whether or not to change out continuation of the current MFP formula to wording that would say recommend an increase of 1% for the MFP formula.
Thank you.
Per pupil increase, you mean, right?
Well, when you get the correct wording, per pupil increase, would that be the?
Yes.
Yes. Make sure we reflect that in that wording, per pupil increase. And I just saw a hand go up, Michelle.
I just want to speak to the motion. So I think where the issue is, I think we all know that there's a budget issue in the whole state of Louisiana. Nobody wants to do anything to make the deficit any more than it is. However, as a task force that is looking out for what's best for the interest of kids in Louisiana, when we know that the data says we have a horrendous teacher shortage looming, we know that we recently saw that we're continuing since 2007 because we have not increased the MFP. There has not been an increase which has caused us to fall below the Southeast average in teacher salary. I think if we don't ask, then people don't understand the severe needs of our schools. And I understand that we are trying to be fiscally conscious, but I don't know how we communicate to the legislators, other than the ones that are right here, how important it is for us to have adequate funding for education if we don't ask for it. And I just want to clarify, if I understood correctly, if we ask for it and they say no, it goes back to Bessie and we go back and they say it's funded at the same rate. It doesn't risk that would not be continued. Or it reverts back. If they don't vote for that, does it revert back to what it is currently? Is that my understanding?
It would revert back, and I would call him a good senator who's here to speak certainly to this point, but it would revert back. The question is timing, and as he pointed out earlier, the timing is tedious on a matter like this.
I don't really think, Mr. Chair, I don't even better than Trump did, but I come from both sides of the table. I think that it is, I believe last year, or no, the year before last, I actually returned the MFP back because we had increased it. We didn't have the money to do it. It was moderate. I sponsored the resolution, and I didn't want to, but I moved to send it back to Bessie. And Bessie understood that, and we went back to the formula as we had the 2014, I think is what we used. So I really think that the idea of asking for more could be very important. I think it could be important to legislators who today are looking for reasons to change our budgeting process and the way that we raise revenue and the revenues that we actually need. It could be a very good tool in the tool chest for those legislators to use. So by us just, to some degree, saying, well, yeah, we understand you have a budget problem, we don't want any more money, when indeed we know we probably should have some more, is a good idea. That being said, understand if I'm going to carry the resolution again this year, and the budgeting process has not gotten any better, then I may have to return the resolution again to Bessie. And I think Bessie understands that we've been through this drill before. But I think for us to just say, no, we don't need more money, is probably not the right thing to do.
Dr. Michelle?
To go back on what Debbie said and what Senator Morris said, in our district, what we determined, we crunched the numbers, and next year we're going to have a reduction of about 60 kids. So because of where the grade levels are, for us, it will have absolutely no impact on our staffing needs. But we're going to lose 160,000 or something, whatever the dollar amount is. It's a large number. So by not having at least the same dollar amount, which could be reflected in that 1% increase, by not having that same dollar amount, we're going to have to lay off people again next year. This year we've got a $6 million deficit. We're dealing with that with huge reduction in force. We're going to have to do the same thing again next year. So I think while it's not easy for you to have to take both sides of the argument, I appreciate that. I think it helps the morale in the districts if somebody sees that we're doing our level best. It's not that the legislature doesn't want to give us money, they don't have it. But somebody, like this committee, is at least recognizing the needs of the districts and doing what we can to be able to do that.
Dr. Fogel?
Oh, gotta watch my voice on this. Everyone can hear me good? So I'm just kind of thinking about this, and I don't particularly care for politics, so I'm trying to just be a straight shooter here. We're broke, but the important thing is we're looking at asking for money. Really, we don't expect to get it. We expect that this is a symbolic gesture to make the point that eventually when we have money in this state, we need to, attend to the needs of teachers and students in our schools. If that's the case, why don't we omit, because I think the offer was 1%. I mean, I just bought a car and I didn't go in asking for a 1%. If that's the case, why don't we add a 0 to that, make it a 10%? I'm serious. We're going to make a symbolic gesture and we're going to make a point that our schools are underfunded, then throw another 0 on it.
Dr. Michelle? Take that microphone from me.
Okay, yeah. and honestly, I get what you're saying, but the reason in my mind that we would not do that is because while we don't expect necessarily that we'll get more money, because we know what the budget crisis is everywhere, we do expect that our request will be seriously considered. And I think 10% would not be something that would lend itself to any kind of lengthy and meaningful discussion.
Mrs. Bell?
I would like to simply say that I do expect the legislature to take us seriously. Now, they may not grant it, and we would have to live with that. But I could have asked for the 2.75, and I didn't. I asked for a modest 1%. I think we need to acknowledge that our kids, our parents, our communities need the funding to properly educate their children, our children. So I wasn't being flippant about it. I was really trying to hit a number that we might have a chance to actually see an increase in the MFP because it's badly needed. Everyone needs this money.
Mrs. Nealon?
Ms. Stanhouse, what is 1% of the current MFP request? What would that amount be?
Of the whole thing on the person.
On the per pupil of the entire MFP resolution that we would be submitting, what would that 1% amount increase be?
We're looking at per pupil as the basis for this, so if you're asking for the impact of the amendment,
I'm asking for the impact of the
it'd be per pupil then.
Yeah, the per pupil would go from 39.61 to 43.57 per pupil. Now, that's a starting point of the formula. I don't know what the implications would that would be, overall. So you're talking, usually a 2% is worth about $75 million. So you could figure that 1% would probably be at least, $40 million probably at this point.
I was guessing about 38 million. I will have to vote against this. I think the legislature is keenly aware that schools need and would like to have additional dollars. And I respect the legislators' desire to give schools more money if they had money to give. I think in this budget environment, our school systems are very fortunate that they've been placed as a top priority and have not been cut, as so many other state agencies and educational agencies have been cut. And for those reasons, I cannot support that amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Nealon. Ms. Roman, did you have your hand up a minute ago?
I would just fall somewhere in between Mr. Corville and Ms. Moe, and why wouldn't you just go with the 2.75? If you're going to go ask for the increase, why not stick to what this task force and others in the past have said is the reasonable increase? Hearing what you're saying, Ms. Moe, totally understand, but is 2.75 unreasonable? And I always assume they're going to negotiate you anyway, so let them negotiate you down to 1.
Ms. Moe?
Well, I was, as I said, trying to hit a number that would be realistic, that the legislature wouldn't just say absolutely no from the get-go, because with the setup of how the MFP is sent to the legislature, they can only vote it up or down, send it back to Bessie. We lose the momentum of time. We don't, there isn't enough time to do that once, much less twice. So I really was just looking at a number that would be somewhat palatable to the legislature. I don't think the 2.75, I think they'll say no automatically, but the 1% is something that they might say, well, let's look at it.
All right, do we have any other, we do have more discussion. Corville?
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to note my agreement with Ms. Caroline. Ms. Moe, with all respect, if you're just trying to make a point, I think you're selling yourself short here. I agree with Caroline. If we're trying to make a symbolic point, then you make the point and then you can negotiate from that. You call out 1% because you're trying to make a point about school funding. Where are you going to negotiate from 1%? Like, if you're going to do something for students and teachers, we need to go all the way.
I think at this point we've exhausted the topic enough, so unless you have something new to add, not just to retort to that, then we're going to go. Ms. Smith?
Thank you. First of all, forgive me for my lack of knowledge on this question, but I'm hearing your conversations and I'm thinking the funds that are presented outside of the formula, where do those funds originate from?
You're going to originate from the legislature.
And so in the past, when those funds have been presented, the legislation has approved the original formula and then added on additional funds?
That's correct.
In the
They're not protected to move forward and be caught in if they're reverted the next year, they'll be considered outside of that.
And how are they allocated once they're applied? Are they dispersed through the school systems evenly, or is it applied directly to the formula? How is it?
Well, it's a law. So the legislature puts terms in the law and determines it. And sometimes, for example, they'll say half of it has to go to teacher salaries, for example.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Any other new discussion for this? If not, we're going to go ahead and vote on it. Mr. Richard?
What are we voting?
I'll repeat before we do the vote. Mr. Richard, one more point?
I think it's worth clarifying, and I know Ms. Cena was put on the spot as far as her mathematical estimates of what 1% of the per pupil would be, but my math shows it's about, it raises 3961 to about 4,000 per student. And then that would amount to the commensurate in millions of dollars. It would be less than the 1.375 that we received a couple of years ago. So, I mean, it's not that much, 1% of the per pupil amount. I think the numbers that were thrown out are not accurate. And if we could clarify that before we vote on anything.
Yeah, I'm incorrect. It's about 4,000 is the per pupil change from 3961 to about 4,000. But the $40 million I would stand by, because no matter how you apply that 2.75, it's usually between 75 and $80 million.
About 40 million total.
For 1%, I would guess it would be about $40 million.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. So, just to clarify the motion that's before you, this is an amendment to the original motion, so what you'll be voting for is to change the wording from continuation of the current enrollment to read, to approve a 1% per pupil increase of the formula. If this motion passes, then we would insert that in the original motion. If it fails, the language of the motion would then be, Bessie would approve a continuation of the current MFP. Mr. Garvey?
Clarification, was it 1%, 1.0, or 1.375?
I had down 1%, and that's what we use as one discussion. We tossed several numbers around. Ms. Moe, I defer to you, but I believe it was 1% that and Ms. Shaw, you seconded 1%. Okay. Without any further, do we have any other questions on clarifying the intent of the motion there? If not, then we're going to vote. Let's do acclamation. All those in favor of the amendment? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Nay.
The ayes have it. So the motion before you now is a motion that the task force recommends that Bessie approve a 1% per pupil increase in the minimum foundation program formula for fiscal year 18-19, accounting for normal student growth, and the task force further recommends that Bessie request that in the event additional funds are realized, the legislature will return the MFP formula to Bessie so that additional funds can be included in the formula. Okay? Do we have any further discussion on that motion as it stands here? I'm sorry.
Get a recording of who wants to be recorded as a no.
Oh, I'm sorry. Anybody want to record as a no? Mrs. Nealon? I think I heard another. Yeah, Dr. Copium. Anyone else? Sorry about that. Okay. So, we now have the motion at hand. Any additional discussion on this before they can vote for this? Remembering that this is this will be the recommendation from the task force to Bessie to act upon. With no additional discussion, then you have the motion before you. Any objections to that motion? With no objections, motion carries. That concludes that item of business then. Do we have any public comment cards?
Yes, sir.
With no public comment cards, I believe adjournment is all that's left.
Motion to adjourn.
All right, so moved.